Welcome all. You are attending the Sacramento Faust Branch October 8th, 2025 meeting. And we're glad to have you here. It's such a nice offering that Bruce Donehower and Robert McDermott have agreed to come share their thoughts regarding anthroposophy and Buddhism. And so I'm going to turn the meeting over to Bruce, and he will take it from there.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm going to start tonight welcoming you again and introducing what we're going to do a little bit. Robert and I are karmic buddies, I would say, in respect to the topic that we are going to be discussing tonight. And we've had many calls about that. You know, we're both in the section for the Literary Arts and Humanities, and Robert is on the leadership group and participates quite actively that way. So we talk quite a bit, mostly when I'm taking a walk at the river. And one of the recurring topics we've talked about over the last year or two is this topic of the relationship of Buddhism to anthroposophy and vice versa. So we'll be unpacking that a bit tonight. So I'm going to let Robert have the mic now and just briefly say hi and introduce himself.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. What you said is all true. We are Dharma buddies and love talking together as we do often. So I'm Robert McDermott. Many of you know my name. I was a professor for 60 years. First in New York and then San Francisco. I was president of the California Institute of Integral Studies and then professor there for 22 years. And in the 70s, I wrote about Sri Aurobindo. And then beginning in the 80s, I started writing about Rudolf Steiner and Anthroposophy. And then that led to many responsibilities on boards, chairing boards, including Rudolf Steiner College, the council, Sophia Project, etc. So anybody who wants to know more can Google me and find out more about myself than I know about myself.
So I'm Bruce, and really my Buddhist study and practice and my study and practice of anthroposophy, they did begin at the same time. And they have continued without interruption for more than half a century now in parallel. And I have found that this is confusing for some folks who are Buddhists, and likewise folks who are anthroposophists. But it's not confusing for me. And it took me a long time to discover why it's not confusing for me, and why, in fact, I'm a dweller in two worlds. And the answer that I discovered quite some time ago is novalis. And all the themes that we find related to novalis. Novalis, as Rudolf Steiner emphasized, had extremely close ties to the Buddha and to the Buddhist spiritual cultural impulse, as well as extremely close ties to the Christ mystery. So, like I said, being a student of novalis, I am a dweller in two worlds. And I began to unpack this dweller in two worlds phenomenon in recent lectures. I'll just point you to one so you know a little more about the context and background of Robert and me. This is the website for the section for the Literary Arts and Humanities. As I said, Robert is a founding member in North America of this section. So if you're interested in this section, this is the website. But the reason that I'm pointing you to it, the North American website, I should say, but the reason I'm pointing it out to you tonight is because this investigation really began during the Holy Nights of the Faust Branch celebration in 2025, when I gave a talk for the Faust Branch on one of the lectures in the Luke cycle. And if you're interested in that prior lecture, you can find a video recording of it on the website. And it's kind of supplements what we're doing tonight. Okay, let's start out. I'll tell you how the flow goes. We're going to do 3 verses now. I'll do one, Robert, and then me. And then we'll both give a very brief introduction to the theme, and then we'll have a dialogue and we'll see how it goes. So I'll read the first verse right now. This is one you certainly all know. All 3 verses are Buddhistic. This is by Rudolf Steiner.
Victorious Spirit, flame through the impotence of irresolute souls. Burn out the ego addiction. Ignite compassion, that selflessness, the life stream of humanity, may rule as the wellspring of spiritual rebirth.
Okay, Robert.
Okay. This is the verse of the loving kindness practice, which I will read so I don't stumble. May I be free from fear. May I be free from suffering. May I be happy. May I be filled with loving kindness. May you be free from fear. May you be free from suffering. May you be happy. May you be filled with loving kindness. May all people everywhere be happy and be filled with loving kindness.
And then our final verse to get us started is by Novalis. The heart is the key to the world and to life. One lives in this helpless situation in order to love and to learn of one's dependency on others. Through imperfection, one becomes open to the influence of others, and this openness is just the point. In sickness, others can and should help us. So Christ, from this standpoint, is the key to the world. Okay, Robert.
I want to begin. This is a suggestion that came from Marion, because on my bookcase behind me, I have a photograph of Rudolf Steiner and a photograph of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Until just before my wife Ellen and I moved, I had another double photograph of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So those are my teachers, and my situation spiritually is a little bit different from Bruce's. I don't feel myself or think of myself as a sort of a double anthroposophy and Buddhism. Rather, anthroposophy is absolutely comprehensive in my life, but it includes both Buddhist teachers, such as the Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh, and it also includes Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And because, in a certain sense, I started my journey out of, not entirely permanently, but somewhat out of Christianity, particularly Roman Catholicism, into Sri Aurobindo and then the Mother. So you could say I'm working on 3 tracks, but I think it's truer to say I really have 1 track that includes Buddhism and Sri Aurobindo, integral yoga, and the Mother. Okay, so I want to begin with an experience which is appropriate for something to do with Rudolf Steiner, since all of his teachings and lectures and books came out of his experience. Well, this one is in the mid-90s, when I was president of the California Institute of Integral Studies. I was a friend of Bob Thurman. It's not that we're not friends, it's just that I don't see him anymore because he's become famous. Anyway, Bob and I were giving a course on Gandhi and the Dalai Lama, and he arranged for the Dalai Lama to come to our school, but really to the Bill Graham Auditorium in Civic Center, and to give lectures every day. And one evening, some friends of Bob arranged for a dinner at the top of the Fairmont. And those of you who have a feeling for the etheric are ready for this little vignette, though you really should have a concept such as the etheric in order to be able to see what's happening behind the appearance. So there were maybe 30 or 40 guests standing, talking. The Dalai Lama had not yet come in. And then all of a sudden there was silence. And I looked around, and sure enough, the Dalai Lama, led by Bob Thurman, had come in, and the Dalai Lama was speaking to the first guest. And I realized that I was next, and in a certain sense prepared, in another sense, not at all. So Bob started to speak about me in Tibetan. Strangely, I never asked him what he said. And don't remember who was next to me or who came after me or any such. What I remember indelibly is the incredibly kind face of the Dalai Lama and the, let's say, etheric force or power, beauty of his presence. So as Bob was speaking about me in Tibetan, the Dalai Lama reached out and held my hands, but I could not look at him. I looked at him and then looked down, and then I began to cry. And then it was really too much. Not that I wanted it to end, only that I knew that I was in the presence of something numinous, transcendent, beyond my capacity. It was a very beautiful moment, which, of course, by now millions of people have had. But that was my moment when I knew that I was in the presence of a transcendent, transfiguring being, namely His Holiness. Now, how do we think about him? Not only his power, but who he is. Well, we think about him because he has lived 14 times. His eye has manifest 13 previous times, which of course leads me to say, well, no wonder I couldn't look at him. He's all of these 14 times. So just imagine what it was like for my dear friend Arthur Zients to be on the stage at Stanford with 1,000 people in the audience, and when they stand up to acknowledge applause, His Holiness turns and puts his hands on Arthur's shoulder and his forehead on Arthur's forehead and blesses him. This is one of those. It's a thank you. It's a thank you, Arthur. You're doing great. The Dalai Lama sort of said. Now, the third person in this I've already mentioned, and that's Bob Thurman. And Arthur and Bob and I, for some years, till pretty recently, were members of the Lindisfarne Fellowship, which met for a week every year. And it had names you would know. They're all quite well-known people. And so, in a way, we share the Dalai Lama in that context. So now, as wonderful as the Dalai Lama is, he's not the Buddha, and there shouldn't be confusion about that. He's trying to become a Buddha. He's as close as we can imagine, and at the same time, he's still working. He's still trying to overcome his desires and still trying to be completely free of fear and suffering, and to be committed to the freedom of everyone else. So let me skip now to talk about the Buddhism that comes from Buddha. And the first important idea is the Four Noble Truths. So this is so simple, and it is absolutely the core of Buddhism. And the first truth is that we suffer. People suffer. Why do they suffer? That's the second truth. We all suffer because we desire. We suffer because we want more. If we have physical pleasures, we want more. If we have money, we want more. If we have power, we want more. And especially since we are living, we want more. We want to live longer. We want permanence. And it's not good news that none of these things are permanent. And you can't have all that you want unless you want to suffer. So the other really important truth is the three jewels, namely the teacher, the teaching, and the community. You'll immediately, I hope, recognize that this is just like anthroposophy. We have a teacher who I think, and I think you think, is the world teacher at this time, and he also brings the appropriate teaching for this time, not ancient teaching, not even medieval teaching, but teaching which is designed particularly for the problem of this time, which is namely, we don't think right. We think materialistically. We need to think spiritually. So, okay, the first jewel is the teacher, Rudolf Steiner, born not like a prince, as the Buddha did or Gautama did, but a working class boy, one of three children in Central Europe, who had to learn his destiny. Well, he did that by warm thinking. He did it by becoming this great teacher of the age. So going back to Buddha, he is the teacher for everybody who wants to be enlightened along that path. And then his teaching is the basically how to overcome suffering and by overcoming desires. Okay, and then I could list, maybe I won't do that, all the ways that he learned, that geometry and Goethe and German idealism, philosophy of freedom, the experience of Christ as a festival of knowledge, then his years in the Theosophical Society. And then you surely know the rest of his amazing contribution to our culture. All right, so then and the last part that I want to emphasize is the third jewel, which is the community. And sometimes anthroposophists think of Buddhism as a kind of deadbeat religion, people trying to get out of the world or out of their life, or just trying to get out, whatever. But actually, if you follow Buddha, you'll find he is this fabulously joyful figure, as the Dalai Lama is. I mean, if you want to watch the video or read the book of the Dalai Lama talking to Archbishop Tutu. Oh my goodness. Well, there's one of my favorite examples was when there was a conference at Middlebury, and Bob Thurman and Dalai Lama were together talking to a Christian theologian who was complaining that Buddhism is negative. And Bob turned to His Holiness and said, "Well, Your Holiness, tell Professor Kaufman what happened when you were the third Dalai Lama and you went into China and you kicked their ass." And the Dalai Lama roared a tremendous laugh, for which he is, of course, famous. He is an incurably joyful person. Okay, so Buddha, Dalai Lama and Buddha together served the Sangha. They served the community. Buddha walked all over Nepal and northern India from place to place, telling people, I'm sorry that you're suffering. You might want to desire less. You might want to be at peace. You might want to try to be free. Doesn't sound negative to me. Okay, so now if we go to the same devotion in Rudolf Steiner. What did he do about the Sangha? He gave 6,000 lectures. He gave hundreds of letters, thousands of individual conversations. Then at the end of the First World War, when Europe was in chaos and suffering, he gave a whole new economic system and a new approach to education, threefold division of society, biodynamic farming, a renewal of the Christian sacraments, and then amazing, extensive research on karma and rebirth. That was his his serving of the Sangha. So we have these three jewels, and we have something like the same four noble truths, and so we have an amazing similarity of a fabulous contemporary teaching taught by fabulous teachers. And so, Bruce, I think that's what I wanted to do by way of an orientation, and maybe, I hope, as a setup for you.
Okay, Robert, thank you. Yeah, and dear friends, as I said, Robert and I, when we thought about this, we thought we should both do a little brief introduction of how we see things. So my turn is next. And the title of my very brief introduction is The Missing Stream. And it's somewhat of a literary perspective on things, because I am a literary guy, basically, when you get down to it. So I will talk briefly now about the theosophical years of Rudolf Steiner's activities in the 20th century. And those were the years 1902, 1913, 1914, when Rudolf Steiner became active in the Theosophical Society, the foundational years when Rudolf Steiner developed his Christology, and the years when he articulated a unique reading of Buddha and Buddhism. Now, when he became the General Secretary of the German section of the Worldwide Theosophical Society in 1902, there were 370 members in the German section, but by 1909, that number had risen to about 1,500, and it's an increase over 7 years that is really a testament to the popularity of Rudolf Steiner and Mari von Sievers in Central Europe. But even so, this was still a very small number of members given the popularity of Theosophy, which at its height had 100,000 members worldwide. So Rudolf Steiner's audience really was a small subset of Theosophy at the time. Rudolf Steiner's Theosophical students slowly began to use the term Anthroposophy interchangeably with the term Theosophy to describe their activity. But the background and vocabulary was still quite theosophical, and folks outside the German section, well, they just thought it was all Theosophy. Call it what you like. Buddhist vegetarians was a common insult. And since Theosophy prioritized Asian wisdom traditions, these wisdom traditions, especially Buddhism, were very much in discussion in those years, and they were very central to what it meant if you self-identified as a theosophist. However, my friends, compared to what we know about Buddhism today, where are we now? More than a quarter of the way into the 21st century, are we not? Compared to what we know today, the theosophical understanding of Buddhism during the late 19th and early 20th century in Europe, it was rather eccentric and blinkered. You know, when we talk about Buddhism during those theosophical years of Anthroposophy, we really should call it Theosophical Buddhism, one might well argue. For example, terms like karma, maya, akasha, which were basic, these were basic to Theosophical vocabulary. They were borrowed from Eastern wisdom sources, but they were given a very original and distinctly European spin. The term akasha, in the usage sense of Akashic Chronicle, for example, or Akashic Record, That comes from Madame Blavatsky and her colleagues. We find the word Akasha in Sanskrit, but it is not used in the theosophical context of Akashic Chronicle or records. The Akashic Chronicle is an example of Western theosophical coinage. Now, there are other examples of Western theosophy rebranding concepts. And, some people do get very exercised about this and hot under the collar. But as a poet and as a literary person, I find this sort of playing around with words to be perfectly fine, to tell you the truth. I think it accords with our human poetic beingness. And so on that note, you should keep in mind that Buddhism, the word, that is a Western colonialist term that world-conquering Europeans coined in the 18th century as a way to pigeonhole wisdom teachings that they did not really understand, and nor would they really begin to understand or dialogue, as we say today, with those wisdom teachings until about our 21st century. Although in the 19th century and the early 20th century, Eurocentric sages, they were all pretty confident that they had this thing called Buddhism properly nailed down and in its place. And as Robert just said, you all know the old cliches. And for most people, those cliches were accepted wisdom in Rudolf Steiner's time. And they go like what Robert just said. Oh, Buddhists are basically folks who can't stand the world. The world is all a lot of Maya and pointless suffering. And any sensible person, like a Buddhist, would want to escape this very bad situation ASAP and never come back to the screaming mess. Now, those cliches, they were repeated quite a bit in the early 20th century and in the 19th century, I should say. And they were accepted wisdom for some folks, and they do still rattle around. I encounter quite a few people with those attitudes. Now, I consider this unfortunate. I don't know about you, but from our perspective in our 21st century, I would say it's also rather ironic. And I say that it's ironic because the historical Buddha styled himself as a teacher who wanted to teach persons to fish rather than just give them a fish and tell them to sit quietly and be happy. And this remains true. It is true for the many generations of teachers who have followed the Buddha in an unbroken lineage succession. Buddhism is really a do-it-yourself approach to the problem of human existence. And that's probably why it's taken hold so well in North America and in the United States in particular. And in this sense, getting back to the word ironic, it has much in common with the ethos that we find expressed by Rudolf Steiner in the philosophy of freedom. Now, I say that because the Buddha Dharma is a path of rigorous inquiry and radical doubt. It is a heart, mind, and body training in how to think clearly and consequentially with the view to overcoming deeply ingrained karmic stupidity and self-imposed ignorance. That's how they phrase it. The Buddha called this spiritual scientific path of freedom and inquiry, learning to have the right view. That's right in there in the beginning of the Eightfold Path, learning to have the right view. And right view is in fact where everything starts and ends, along with compassion for self and world. Test the truth for yourself, said the Buddha. Don't take it on faith from me or from any glamorous authority, no matter what they tell you or what miracles you behold. Now, if you go out tonight, or maybe you're doing this while I'm talking, and you Google the phrase Buddha's dying words, you will find right at the top of the results a hit that says Buddha's dying words. the ultimate self-help advice. And what were those dying words? Well, Buddha's dying words to Ananda, if you don't know them, were, quote, "Be a lamp unto yourself, Ananda. Be a refuge to yourself. Take yourself to no external refuge." Now, my friends, for me, I don't know about you, but I find that to be a very Parzivallian attitude. And I'm referring to Wolfram's Parzival, not, and that's a poem that every anthroposophist, I'm sure, knows very well. And this Parzivallian Buddhist attitude, it's especially true when we consider Parzival's practice of compassion and care for self and world. Uncle, what ails thee? That is the compassionate question and gesture at the very heart of Wolfram's Grail poem, is it not? And likewise, Parzival's individualistic path is a path right down the middle. Doesn't Wolfram tell us that? I think so. It's a balance between extremes. Now, many persons alive in our 21st century, and I'm sure you are among them, have no trouble recognizing that this Parzivallian middle way path of compassion and care for the world and for all sentient beings is a core teaching of the Buddha and a core bodhicitta teaching of Madhyamika Buddhism, or middle way Buddhism, such as we hear, for example, Robert just mentioned the Dalai Lama. He's a prominent exponent of that. And you find this Parzivallian ethos in all of His Holiness's books, as many of us know. He's an amazing scholar and a brilliant teacher. But at the beginning of the 20th century, when Rudolf Steiner entered the world of theosophy and began to reform it from the inside out, persons thought of Buddhism as an escape mechanism. As I said, the world's a lot of Maya and we need to bust out. Early 20th century knowledge of Buddhism oriented itself towards Hinayana Buddhism and the Pali texts. The Sanskrit texts, or the Tantra texts that flowed north to Tibet from the great Indian Buddhist universities of the early Christian era, which were the foundational texts for Mahayana Buddhism, these were largely unknown. And even more confusing at that time, in the early 20th century, many people mashed up Schopenhauer's very popular and very persuasive, but very pessimistic, world-disparaging philosophy with the Buddha Dharma. And Buddhism, so-called, was viewed through a very Eurocentric lens. And as I said, for persons in Rudolf Steiner's audience, knowledge of Buddhism came from theosophical texts. People simply did not have access, as we do today, in abundance, to authentic teachers and authentic texts or authentic lineages. And I'm not just speaking here of Asian Buddhist teachers. Today, there are many authentic Buddha Dharma lineage holders and teachers who were born in the West. Robert just mentioned his friend, Robert Thurman, for example. So today, at the beginning of the second quarter of, oh my God, it really is, the second quarter of our 21st century, more than 100 years after Rudolf Steiner's death, we know a lot more about the Buddha Dharma than persons knew at the beginning of the 20th century. But it's been my experience during my life that the term Buddhist anthroposophist remains a term of puzzlement, if not an oxymoron, if not a red flag to the bull in some cases. In respect to our anthroposophy in our 21st century, I have to ask, and I have asked repeatedly, is the Buddha Dharma a missing stream? All right, well, now you've heard Robert and me, two talking heads, talk. And now what the talking heads would like to do, as we do often when we're walking and talking is have a little dialogue around things and a conversation between ourselves. And perhaps we can involve you guys as well. I'm just not sure because we're trying this out for the first time tonight. As I said, I did a presentation for the Faust Branch earlier on in the year, but that kind of went off the rails. So I'm not quite sure how this evening will go. I see here in the chat that would be interested in adding the intersection of the Franciscan stream. Yes. St. Francis and St. Clare. And another chat question here. Robert, I'm just kind of taking my lay of the land here. I wonder if much of the misunderstanding of Buddhism and Germany and the West was an inheritance of the first serious European misreader of the Buddhist Dharma from a philosophical point of view, Schopenhauer. Okay, keep in mind with Schopenhauer, his ideas got pushed onto Buddhism quite naturally, but he started out more impressed by the Upanishads and it kind of came into Buddhism through the back door or was taken in through the back door by other people. But his views did certainly influence things. Robert, do you have anything to add being a philosopher? I'm kind of out of my depth there.
No, you're not out of your depths. You're in your depths, fortunately, for all of us. Yeah, I've never been Schopenhauerian or whatever. I can't even pronounce it, in fact, because temperamentally, I have this incurable optimism, cheerfulness.
You too.
which is why I'm not much of a philosopher.
Oh, get out of here. Right.
Cheerfulness keeps breaking in. I don't have a lot to say about Schopenhauer. We haven't been friends since I was required reading in college, and not very extensively. So I'm wondering, as I was listening to you, as I was being thrilled by your clarity and, in a way, your advocacy, I was wondering if you can identify places such as in the practice or in the in the response to the Buddha or response to the Dalai Lama or response to Rudolf Steiner, where there are obstacles, conflicts, things that, I mean, just like, well, I really would like to hold these two together except for whatever. What would that except for be?
Let's go back a couple steps, my sanguine friend. And if I could, may I do that? Okay. And we'll back ourselves into the hard topics, because I don't want to start from the perspective of a point of disagreement. I think if wisdom traditions are true, they are fundamentally, because we are human beings, going to be in agreement. Otherwise, we're arguing, I'm not sure to what purpose. But let's go back to that statement you made about cheerfulness in relationship to Schopenhauer. He wasn't the most cheerful, sunny, friendly person around. He had, and and in the 19th century, as we know from Rudolf Steiner, was fraught with problems for people. It was really a difficult century by all description that you read about it, especially the description we read about it from Rudolf Steiner. It's important to keep in mind, going back to your remark right at the beginning, this thing about suffering, that Buddhism is not a sad, mopey, melancholic, oh, life is all suffering, and that's the point. Let's get out of here, dude. This doesn't work. That's not it. And as your friend Robert Thurman has said many times, get over it. The Buddha's teaching is not fundamentally about suffering. Any fool can discover suffering. What's the big deal? The point is, there's a way to be happy now and cheerful. And what is that all about? That's the big secret hidden in there. Now, some people have a big problem with that. And then the 19th century Schopenhauer types would have a big problem because somehow the attitude exists out there that it's not okay to be happy. I hear that about the Dalai Lama, for example, from friends at times. That why is this guy always smiling? Why is he always happy? Why isn't he earnest? You know what Nietzsche said? He who laughs has not heard the terrible news. But anyway, I think it's important when we're thinking about Buddhism, and as the question came in about a misreading, I do agree with that question. Fundamentally, I think there was, from a literary perspective, a misreading. But anyway, I'll stop. Go on, Robert. You take it now. I need to drink it. I have to have a sip of tea.
I'm excited to say, oh, please don't. Okay. Yeah. Where are we? I wasn't so much trying to emphasize conflict or disagreement or stress so much as what is the Buddhist practice that we as anthroposophists can best sustain and emphasize.
That's a question to the audience, or to you, or to me?
I was thinking I was actually had your face on in front of me when I asked it.
Remember, we were having a conversation about this earlier, I think, and you just reminded me of it. So I think it might be helpful. If you know the Pali Sutras a little bit, there's some famous stories. There's one famous story about the arrow. Buddha's telling a story about a person who has an arrow impaled in the arm. And that arrow is going to finally end that person's life unless it's removed. But before, says the Buddha, the person allows this arrow to be removed, he demands to know all kinds of extraneous things. Who made the arrow? Where did the feathers come from? How was it fletched? What type of wood? Where was the wood grown? And on and on and on. And the Buddha points out quite sensibly, really, this person will be dead before he gets all the answers that he needs. And the point of the parable is, Buddha did teach in parables just like Jesus, that just remove the arrow, deal with the suffering, and don't get distracted by the story. Now, that is one problem point, I must admit, between Buddhism and a Western view of things. We love stories, in fact, and I'm in the Literary Arts and Humanities section, and we love to we look at the world through the lens of narrative and drama and tales. Buddha's really concerned with getting down to the basic problems of human beingness in the world and the moral qualities that are required to be cultivated in order to make yourself less susceptible to suffering and make others less susceptible to suffering, and thereby improving the situation for yourself and the total situation. The viewpoint is that if you're a mess, you're going to make others a mess too, no matter how hard you try to do the good. Buddha Dharma practice point of view is very practical and oriented towards ethics. It all comes down to ethics, ethics, ethics. It's nothing else except about the good and learning how to bring the good into the world.
But I do want to emphasize, and I'm sure you do as well, that Rudolf Steiner emphasized and needed us to emphasize the importance of free thinking, which is the first half of philosophy of freedom. The ethics half is the second part, etc. So we can be ethical if we can think spiritually and selflessly. Now, do you find the same in the teachings of the Buddha or the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh?
Again, you're asking me? I do. Yes, I do.
You do.
Yes.
Seems to me that would be very helpful for people who are trying to reconcile and trying to to benefit from both traditions and both teachers.
Yeah. How to respond to that? Keep in mind maybe that Buddhism is not this monolithic entity. It consists of various schools and points of view, all of which are fundamentally in agreement, by the way. But you have three vessels, as they talk about: the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana teachings. Now, as I said in my introduction, in the early 20th century and 19th century, it was largely the Hinayana perspective that was appreciated and understood. But that's a subject maybe for another evening. And what I like to swing back to, because I just noticed in the chat here, my eyes are darting over the screen, a comment came in that Schopenhauer missed the point of the Dharmic traditions in general, because while deeply understanding the metaphysics of the Vedic mindset, he utterly ignored the important spiritual practices, namely yoga and meditation, which are key to gaining the relevant insight into what would otherwise be a dismal philosophy absent these practices. A very helpful comment. Just one thing I want to add: when you hear the word yoga, it doesn't just mean physical discipline exercises. Yoga can also be mind training. And a yogi isn't just someone who takes the clothes off and contorts the body in the sun and does deep breathing. If you're a serious student of the philosophy of freedom, for example, or even Kant or Hegel or Fichte, you are doing mind yoga. You are doing the type of intellectual yogic discipline that is really at the core of Tibetan Buddhist practice, at least in certain schools, well, the one that the Dalai Lama represents, for example. So going back to the question here, don't think it's just about stretching your body. It's also stretching your mind.
And the exemplar of that, those yogas, all four of them, is Sri Aurobindo, whose synthesis of yoga, hundreds and hundreds of pages on each of the yogas. So we have a third party if we need him to come in and mediate between those teachings that look to have omitted philosophy. Aurobindo started out studying German idealism in Cambridge, after all. So we have rich sources such as did not exist in the 19th century. It's been a very wonderful a century and a half for producing what we need to have a synthesis of the best of these traditions.
Yes, we have access to texts which you would have to be extremely, extremely fortunately blessed with your karma to have found even a short time ago.
Yes.
And we have access to authentic lineage traditions. In respect to access to authentic wisdom tradition teachings, you are living in a golden age, such as may not come around again very soon. So take advantage of it while you're still alive. Could I go off on a tangent for a minute? Because someone mentioned St. Francis earlier in the chat.
Yes.
Is that okay? All right. The Franciscan impulse that, as we know from Rudolf Steiner, that we find in Christianity, according to Rudolf Steiner, owes a lot to a Buddhistic impulse. And it's not that we want to put anthroposophy in opposition to Buddhism. That would be silly. But we really, the thoughts that Rudolf Steiner brought are so challenging, both to the Anthroposophical tradition and the Buddhist tradition, that I don't think we've really gotten our minds around it yet, or may not for quite a long time. Let's see here, another comment. Oh, yes, interesting, good. I'm glad we got this one. The tale of Barlaam and Josaphat, which was a thinly veiled retelling of the story of the Buddha, was a medieval bestseller, true, extremely popular and widely circulated in Europe during the lifetime of St. Francis. The story's themes of renouncing worldly wealth and embracing an ascetic life closely align with St. Francis's own spiritual journey. Thank you for that comment.
When I saw the question about St. Francis, I immediately thought of the comment at the end of the Spiritual Guidance of Humanity, where Rudolf Steiner says, the being, the I, who became Francis of Assisi, who had, during the 6th century, was a disciple of Buddha on the Black Sea. It's just thrilling to think of that I taking in all that Buddhist wisdom, getting ready for his conversion from a playboy to a fabulous mendicant who kissed the lepers.
We're just about at the hour, and I need to get another signal from Sandra how we're doing.
We can actually go till 8:30 if you want. It's up to you.
Yeah, we're two old guys. I don't know if we can make it.
You go, you be the judge of how far you want to go.
Okay, all right. Robert, do you want to jump in for a minute while I scan the chats here?
I can't do an ancestral voice, even though it is my favorite Barfield book. And by the way, I know from him that it was his favorite book, but that particular comment is not coming to my mind because it's just been too. I read it and talked to him about it in 1983, which is no longer recent.
Did you ever have a conversation with Owen about Buddhism specifically?
I did not. No.
Did he? Okay. That never came up in your discussions or any of the presentations?
No, I was thinking of that earlier. No. He was so busy dealing with those inklings.
Yeah, the inklings, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar. I am familiar with Barfield, but not to the depth that you and, say, Jeff Hippolito are. And I can't think either off the top of my head.
As Jeff probably, Owen Barfield himself would have trouble keeping up. But yes, that would be a great topic.
That would be another great topic, possibly one that Jeff could join us on.
Seems likely.
Yeah. Right. Let me scan here a moment. So yeah, our intention, as I said, and I think this is worthwhile repeating. Robert probably expressed it better than I did temperamentally, but the purpose here is not to put one thing in opposition to the other, or to do a Consumer Reports pros and cons type of lining up the features of this and that. That would be very silly, both from an anthroposophical point of view, I think, and also from a Buddhist point of view, and from the view of someone who considers him or herself a kind of Parsifal figure on her way or his way to the Grail, motivated by this inner light of striving, and steering the way forward as best he or she can by a clear-sighted, heart-based understanding of human experience, not referring to outer authorities, not referring to hollowed texts, not referring to anything outside the realm of one's own experience. That's the basic lesson that we find in that Parsifal poem. As I said, Parsifal means right down the middle. It's a path of the middle way. And it's a significant poem for all of us, I think. And as you also know, Rudolf Steiner said in the concluding chapter of his canonical book, foundational book, Occult Science, that the spiritualization of the human being achieved through the human being's own efforts is the key to an understanding and at the heart of the Grail.
Yeah.
You can find that in the last chapter there. That does sound very much like a Dharma teaching.
Yeah. Bruce, one part that I often think about, and I'm thinking about it now, that we haven't touched on, though it seems I always bring it into sort of the center of this question about what should we be doing spiritually, and that is karma. So we're talking about the, say, relative advantages or disadvantages or truths or strengths of, say, a tradition. But that's only half of the equation. The other half is, what should I be looking for in this life? And partly as a result of what I did or didn't do in the previous life, but also in preparation for the next life. What is not what is objectively the best teaching, but what did I come to find? And what is my angel or my spiritual guides asking me to learn because of my strengths and weaknesses? Not so much now focusing on ism as on my strengths, weaknesses, aspirations, limitations. Why am I suffering? How can I remove my fear? That's all extremely personal, having to do with my karma. So I felt that in our previous conversation and tonight again, I feel that we didn't so much focus on that, though I think we should.
Would you like to make an attempt to start? Go farther?
I thought I just did, but anyway. Yes, what I want to point out is that this calls for sort of a prayerful humility to try to be guided to the teachings and the practices that are best able to advance us spiritually. So not so much what is in the teaching as what is in the teaching for me, because I and the world depends on my making my finding what I came to find.
Yeah, well, that's helpful, Robert. And it reminds me of these three yanas again, and that's often a stumbling point for folks. You know, if your life is a mess, you feel like it's a mess, and you're out of sync with the world, and everything's a problem, and everything is looking very grim. Where do you start? Well, you have to start with your own house. You have to start with yourself. This is Buddhist perspective. That is the Hinayana moment, when you need to get just on top of your own spiritual difficulties and get yourself straightened out in respect to the spiritual world. So that's a very kind of inward looking, reflective, personal period of growth, one might say. But eventually, if all goes well, you start to feel better. Maybe you drop some of those addictions you had. Maybe, you started not cussing as much as you used to do. Maybe you're a little bit kinder to people. And life starts to get a little better. And as you start to get feeling better, again, this is the Buddhist perspective, as you get starting to feel better, you start to want to naturally treat other people according to your own sense of well-being. I mean, if I'm feeling good, why would I go out and call you a son of a bitch? Because I know that's going to make you upset and will hurt you. That's an example of karma, right? If I call you an a-hole, you're going to be mad. Well, I just had a karmic moment with you, and it wasn't good for me. But if I'm feeling good of myself, good, and fundamentally I'm fine, feeling like my house is in order, I bring that sense of well-being out into the world. That's a fundamental Buddhist attitude in the Mahayana moment, where this compassion isn't something that you work on as a discipline, like lifting weight, where every day you discipline yourself to be compassionate. You give yourself 5 things you want to do that are going to be compassionate. So you're on this. No, it flows out naturally. They say the true gesture of compassion happens automatically, naturally, because it's like breathing. It's our natural human state. Now, what about the Vajrayana tradition? This always gets me in trouble. It got me in trouble in my last talk, but I'll try it again. Why not? Beat me up if you want to. There are some people in the world who, once they get to this sense of love and compassion, once they get to this sense of feeling love and compassion for the world. And once they get to a sense of feeling the suffering of all sentient beings and the suffering of the world, Christianity talks about that. Once they get to this sense that it's just unbearable to me to feel all this suffering, I need to go quicker. I need to go through my own personal development more quickly so that from the Buddhist perspective, I can become a Buddha and help these people, because as a simple human being, I cannot. That's the ideal in Buddhism. And in Buddhism, anyone can take a bodhisattva vow. You don't have to be in a special college somewhere where there are 11 other bodhisattvas or something. Robert's probably a bodhisattva, for example. Anyone can take the bodhisattva vow. And in the Vajrayana tradition, you want to accelerate everything as quickly as possible so that you can bring about the alleviation of suffering in the world. That's what all these techniques that we hear about, dream yoga, tumo, all these, stories that excite people and get them hot and bothered sometimes. Going back to what our friend said here in the chat, we're really just talking about advanced practices of yoga and meditation in order to accelerate one's ability ultimately to benefit the world in the greatest way possible. So it starts with the self, becomes an interest in the other, and then you just can't wait to get it happening faster. That's one way to understand it.
And why did you get in trouble?
I don't know. I should say, I know this is a minefield. I know tonight we are walking on a minefield. And that's why really when Robert and I would talk about this on our walks when I was at the river, Robert would say, Bruce, we're getting older. We need to get this topic out there. And I said, I don't know, Robert, I'm not sure that, I know it's going to be a difficult topic to present. And Robert, you kind of, you're the reason we're doing this tonight, my friend, I think. You're the one you're the instigator here.
Uh-huh.
Bruce, Mr. Introverted, keep his big mouth shut, practice Michaelic silence, which I like to do, would not have done it without my pal here sitting on the Zoom room.
Oh, on that scale, I'd be tired, Right. Well, I think that Rudolf Steiner is an example for that matter. So is the Dalai Lama, in that what they took up as tasks day after day, almost hour by hour, if you look at the Dalai Lama schedule, is what they're called. What is the suffering that calls them? I mean, Rudolf Steiner couldn't stop meeting with these people, who came with their, seemed to me, rather small problems, considering, the whole of Europe was in flames. But there was a need, so he responded, and that seems to me a major part. If we think about his life, after doing hundreds of lectures on the events in the New Testament, then the war comes to an end, and he turns to economics. He turns to farming. He turns to all these practical concerns. Why? Because that's where the need was. That to me is his karmic situation, to come into the world and try to fix what calls to him. In the Dalai Lama's case, the whole of Tibet calls to him. He can't avoid it. And Rudolf Steiner couldn't avoid just looking left and right. He saw minefields, he saw cemeteries, he saw nations just vying against each other almost incurably. So that seems to me to be, that's karmic yoga, right?
Yeah, karma yoga, yeah.
The yoga without benefit to oneself.
There is a comment in the chat which I want to draw everyone's attention to. I don't really want to unpack it tonight, but you should investigate it on your own, perhaps. It's from Seraphim Winslow. Vajrayana Tonglen meditation is ideal for the acceleration of the alleviation of universal suffering. We don't have time tonight to unpack Tonglen meditation. However, it is a very important part of the bodhicitta practice. And I do urge everyone, if you are interested in this topic, to look into it. You can find that chat in there from Seraphim Winslow. And if you don't like to read, Pema Chodron has very good audio lectures on this. I forget the titles exactly. You would, if you relate to the Franciscan side of things, this would really speak to you. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and the other we're kind of running down on time, but I do want to make a plug here. Well, plug is the wrong word. I sometimes get frivolous a little bit. What some people, it's because I'm an old professor. And so, one of my tasks is to keep students awake. So sometimes I say things that get me in trouble. But I want to make a plug for Novalis, because as I said at the beginning of my talk tonight, and I don't want any of you as students of Rudolf Steiner to lose track of this, please. It is to Novalis that one can look to find many of the insights, inspirations, and perhaps answers to some of the questions and themes that Robert and I are kind of stumbling and trying to present tonight. Novalis, if you know anything about his karmic biography, you will understand that there are very profound mysteries here that touch upon the Christ mystery and the Buddha. I didn't say the mystery of the Buddha. And that touch upon very important teachings given by Rudolf Steiner, which you will find nowhere else in Christian theology or in Buddhist commentary, about how these streams, the Buddhist and the so-called Christian, flow together and support and reinforce each other in the world. And one doesn't have to talk about Buddha being on Mars in order to make sense of this. One can approach it in a poetic way that allows it to make quite good sense. And that's what Novalis does. Novalis, the herald of anthroposophy. I said I wouldn't be here tonight if Robert hadn't prodded me, but I certainly wouldn't be here tonight if I hadn't connected with Novalis. No way.
Bruce, if I may say, that's a wonderful conclusion.
Okay, then, like Seinfeld said, always end on the high note.
Well, that's absolutely a high note.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Robert and I are sincerely appreciative of your attention. If you do have questions, please send us emails. We'd be glad to hear from you. We do want to do this again. This is a vast, difficult, and profound topic, which we both feel has been neglected and not discussed enough.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
All right. Good night, everyone.